Hello and welcome to another training video, and welcome to another one in the series on pivot tables. So in this video what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at how we build a simple data model in order to use the feature called Power Pivot. So Power Pivot lets us summarize data which comes from multiple different sources. So if we refer back to the file that we were looking at in the last video, we built this pivot table to summarize this set of data here. Now this table of data is what we refer to as flat data. In other words, it's a single set of data that contains everything, and it may end up with hundreds and hundreds of columns just in order to actually store everything. Now a problem with this is a record of facts or things that happened. So here we have the salesperson's name, and that is repeated several times through the data. Now actually, if we're talking about millions of rows of data, this becomes incredibly inefficient, and it also means that if I'm storing any other information about, say, Belinda, like her number of hours per week, the date she started, her address, her email, her pay rate, all these other bits of information, you can see that I would end up with a huge amount of data, a number of columns within my set of data, just in order to have everything I can refer to simply. So we don't do that. What we actually do is what we're going to refer to in this file here. So what we do is we take, instead of Belinda, we put in an ID number. So what this means is every time this is repeated, it's just a simple number that's being repeated, which takes far less memory than however many characters of text data we needed to store. And again, this makes a significant difference when we're talking about millions of rows of data or any kind of big data. So if we were just talking about a small spreadsheet with 100 rows on it, absolutely fine, put it as flat as you like. It's not really going to make a difference, but like I say, when you get to big data, it really makes a difference. So what we do instead is we have a reference table, a lookup table. And in here we would have that reference number, and then the name of the salesperson, whether they're full or part-time, number of hours, and all the other relevant information to do with that particular record. Now, the original table is referred to as a fact table. So this is a record of things that happened. So these were the sales that took place. And if I go into my table ribbon, you'll notice that I've named this lowercase f and then sales. Now over here, I've called this one lowercase d and then staff. Now the D refers to dimension. Now that's the database terminology for the type of table that this is. So I have a fact table, and then I have various different dimension tables, which can also be referred to as lookup tables, and that's a much more human English way of understanding what they are. So these are where I look up the details of that particular ID number. So you'll see here that I actually have some more information about different makes, the region they're manufactured in, so I could group by the region of manufacture, and I also have information on the profit margin that we make on each of these particular models for sale. And that will be important when we come on to more complex data modeling, like working out KPIs, because we don't just want to work out how much a salesperson sold. We'd actually like to work out what was our profit on that salesperson's sales, and then relate that back to how many hours of work did they do for that, and how much did they cost for the amount of profit that they made us. And we can work out some kind of index from that to say whether they were effective or more effective than each other. Okay, let's first of all have a look at how we would build this model. Now the simplest way of building a data model is in an empty workbook. So not from the same workbook that you have the files in. And you'll understand why when I actually come to it. So let's just first of all make a new workbook. So I've just done Control N for a new workbook. At the moment it's called Book 1. That's absolutely fine, but you do need to rename it before you save it, otherwise you've lost what it is, you will have forgotten what it is that's in that file. Now, I'm going to go to the data ribbon, and I'm going to get data from an Excel file. So I say from a workbook, and I'm going to refer to that other workbook that I've got open in the background, But do be aware that I'm not referring to the one I've got open, I'm referring to the saved copy of that file. So it's on my desktop, it's called Pivot Tables 4, and I'm referring to the saved copy on my desktop, not actually the one that I have open in the background. And in fact, I will simply close the one in the background just so we don't get any confusion. It's not going to let me do it until I've actually finished with this dialog box. Now what we have within that file is we have various different elements. Now we have these little elements here which have a table symbol, and we have these ones here which have a sheet symbol. Now I don't want to get any of the sheets, but I do want to get all of these tables to bring them all into my data model. So I'm going to say select multiple items, and I'm going to choose all of the ones with the table symbol next to them, because they're all of the ones that I'm going to relate to each other. Now almost always you would go into transform data, because one of the steps that the machine does when it transforms is it looks at the data types within any of the columns and it makes a best guess as to what they should be. So what you're probably going to see is that the machine, for various of these, it might end up with a changed type column here. Now in my machine that's not happening, and the reason is because I've turned that off as a default in my queries. So let's go through them and let's change the ones that we do need to change, and actually there is only one, and this is in our fact table. So in the fact of sales, if you have a look here, you'll notice that the price has gone in as what we call general type. Now because I'm going to be doing maths on this column, I need that to go in with a specific type, and I can also here specify that it's going to be a currency data type. So that will be useful when it comes to formatting in the pivot table later on. So that's actually the only change I want to make. But what I am going to do is I'm going to have a look at the top of my data, because when I get to the top you'll see that there's a green bar that goes across, but it doesn't go across 100% of the way. And if I hover over that, it's telling me why, and it's telling me that actually one of these items, if I right click, it comes up, and if I show you the quality peak, it's telling me that one of them is empty. Now that empty one is actually the very bottom one, because the table that this came from had a total row and it had nothing in this total row, because I can't add up my dates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say remove empty. Now the green bar goes across 100%, and that is a perfect column. It's got 100% valid entries, no errors. And I would quickly look across my data just to check all of that, and I'm doing this particularly in my fact data. Yeah, I'm not doing this on the lookups, not necessarily. I'm just doing it on the facts. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say close and load to. So these are my queries. This is not yet in the data model, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a connection to that other workbook, which I can then refresh, and I'm going to, in this workbook, add them all into my data model. So I click OK. And now they're all loading and adding into the data model. And what they're doing at this point is they're refreshing the data. So in the background, they're opening that other file and looking at the data and then closing that file down. So I'm going to just shut that file down in the background, because bear in mind they are referring to the closed version of that file. For some reason it's not letting me close it. There we go. It was because it was still refreshing at the time. And now I've got these in my data model, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a relationship between the various different files. Now the relationship that I'm going to build is something called a schema, and I'm going to use a graphic schema to actually build the relationship. And you'll notice down here I've got the details of each of these individual queries. But if I go into diagram view, what I can do is graphically arrange them. So what I have over here is I have the fact sales, and I can drag that down to show all of the fields in sales. And then I have my 4 lookup tables or dimension tables, which I can place around the outside. Now what I can do is I can say that we looked at salesperson, and we said that within salesperson we had this staff, and the staff ID number was what matched the ID salesperson. So I'm going to click and drag from salesperson over to ID, and the computer is analyzing the data in both of these files now, and it says here I have unique values in that column, so I only have one of each value, but in this one I have multiple values because Belinda sold more than one car. So that's exactly what we wanted. Now this arrow denotes there's one on this side, there's many on this side, and it's being filtered in this direction. So if I applied a filter on the salesperson, what it would do is it would show me the filter of these would be filtered by the salesperson. I'm going to do the same with these ones. Now this is my payment type. I'm going to drag ID over ID payment type, and you'll notice it doesn't matter which direction I drag the connection in. So this is my make, and it does matter which one I drop them over, which column I drop them on. And this one is my customer age. Now what I would be looking for when I'm modeling is I get my facts initially, and my facts would be these summarized or efficiently stored data. And I would then say, okay, that's all the facts. First thing I then do is I say, are my numeric fields correct? So my numeric fields, they actually need to be put into the right data type. So in this case, I put it into currency. I will do so again within the data model in a moment, and that will then feed through to my formatting in my pivot table. But what I need to do is also just make sure that these are actually the same data type, where I've got ID salesperson, and that's a number in here. That also needs to be a number in here, not text and number. That won't match. Okay, let's just switch back to our data view, and in our F sales you'll see that our price has come through as currency. Now that's fantastic, because this will now feed through into our pivot table that we create from this. So let's do file and close, and now we can start building a pivot table. So what I'm going to do for a pivot table here is I just click in an empty cell. Now I don't have any tables within this file. All I have is the things in my data model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say insert pivot table, and it's automatically going to default to using the workbook's data model to find the data for my pivot table. It's going to put it on an existing worksheet, and there's where it's going to go. So it's basically choosing the cell that I had selected. So make sure you've chosen the right cell before you insert pivot table. What I now have is I have all of the available tables which are within my data model. Now this little icon here refers to the data model table. If I had any existing tables in this workbook, they would also appear in here, but they wouldn't have that database icon in the bottom right hand corner. All they would have is a table icon. Now it's very important that you don't use those ones, that you do use the ones in the data model if you're going to use a relationship, or if you're going to rely on a relationship between them, because the actual straightforward tables will not have the relationships between them that we set up in our data model in that graphic view. So what I can now do is I can go to my make and drag make down into there, and I can now go to my sales and get my price and drag that into there. And even though those are from different tables, I've been able to sum up my price and put on a row filter, so row context filter. So that's great. And I can also then go into, and if I take salesperson and put it there, this particular table actually only has numeric values, so it only has the number for the salesperson. If I want to see the name of the salesperson, what I need to do is get from the sales or from the staff table, and I want the salesperson, and that's their name. So that's in a nutshell how we work with a simple data model. So we had a very, very simple data model there. and creating pivot tables using Power Pivot, which is a pivot table built from multiple data sources. Now, one other thing we see at the top of this pivot table, which is different to normal, is we can choose to only show the active tables. In other words, only showing the ones we've used, or if I show all, it shows me everything that's available for me to use, both within the data model and just other data sets, so tables within my file that I'm working in. Okay, like I say, that's a very, very quick outline into working with Power Pivot. The next video is going to talk more about the data model, data modeling, and how we can build extra calculations. So, for example, where I wanted to work out what is my profit on each of those sales rather than the total sale price, and then perhaps working out a KPI, key performance indicator, to then match that up with the cost of a member of staff compared to the cost of amount of profit that they bring in, or the value of the profit they bring in. But that will be in the next video. If you have found this useful, don't forget to like and subscribe down below. And once more, thank you for listening.